Hi. In the first little clip that I did, the previous to this one, uh, I asserted actually that much of what is identified today as Christianity is not in accord with what the church historically has always counted to be Christianity. That through development throughout history, that new ideas have come up, whole movements have taken place that have shifted the original message that the church had always believed to be what the Bible presented as the truth, Christianity, has shifted and moved it away, and lots of other philosophies, basically human ideas, man's ideas, have crept in and corrupted the message, so that today a large part of the guys you see on TV and publishing books, and a lot of the corner churches in every neighborhood are identified as Christian, and there are many that are talking about Jesus, the Bible, so forth. But if you look at what they're teaching, it simply isn't in accord with what the church used to teach and understand. The behind all this, or at the foundation of all of this, is where do we get what we understand to identify as Christian? I said in that previous clip, and I'm restating now, my point here isn't I have it all right and you should listen to me and everyone else is wrong but me. My point is all of us can go to the Bible and read it and see what it says and compare it to what's largely being said today by people who, again, identify themselves and their message, their teaching, as Christian, and see that it just doesn't match up. It's not, I'm smarter than them, or my ideas are better than them, or I'm a better Christian than them. I'm simply saying, and I mentioned in that previous clip, I wasn't raised in Christianity. We didn't go to church. There was no religion in the home I grew up in. I began to study this later in life just because I found it interesting, and anybody can. You can, as I say, I reiterate, you can open the Bible and study and see what was being taught that first generation, first century Christians, and it just very largely doesn't match up with today. So if that's my argument, that the discrepancy isn't what I think about things or what others think about things, but if I'm pointing to what the Bible says, then the first thing it seems we kind of need to register is the starting point that the Bible is the source of what Christianity is. It didn't just kind of collect together with the various ideas and through the civilizations and environmental conditions just kind of develop into what we now. It's based on a text. Christianity, the ideas of Christianity are based on what the Bible says God expects from His people, and why He created the world. The Bible, the Christianity is a belief system based on a text that it believes to be revealed, a revealed text, not a man-made, concocted collection of writing, but a revealed from God Himself. That's the inspired part of the Bible. So we need to consider, is the Bible a valid source to go to? Can we rely on the Bible? And very much in our time, that question is the Bible we have today reliable? Is it the same Bible that the early first century Christians had? And I think there's just, we'll move through this real quickly, but there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, that start, I think most of us have heard of this telephone game idea that the Bible has been handed down through so many generations, copies of copies of copies of copies. Certainly it must have been corrupted at some point. And then a lot of other folks insert the argument that certainly there were corrupt churchmen, various potentates and leaders and Caesars and popes and whatever, who wanted to control the masses, control the people. And so they inserted things into the Bible and took things out of the Bible. They concocted a text to give to the people that would permit them, these corrupt leaders, to manage their civilization better and so forth. I've heard people even suggest that the Bible was like written by Constantine, that as the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, that Constantine wanted to control things and thought it a clever idea to concoct this book that, and I've heard people argue that that the Bible was written by Constantine. So there's all and that's just historically absurd. We know that's not the case. But there's all kinds of ideas that come down to us that make thinking reasonable people think, well, I don't want to base my whole belief system on this book that's 2,000 years old, at least the New Testament, and has been copied and copied and copied and copied, and we don't have the originals, and to rely on these copies of copies seems a tenuous kind of, maybe not good idea. The thing is, the reality, the truth, historic truth of how this happened gives us a much different picture than the assumptions that we have and that the critics all try to promulgate. In Jesus's day, there wasn't a Bible that was then copied. There were lots of Bibles all over the place, and in Jesus's day, that would be the Old Testament. And as the New Testament began to be written by the Apostle Paul, writing to churches in other towns and giving them instruction and so forth, and the accounts of Jesus's life, the Gospels, as all these things began to be written and collected, they were copied and sent to other churches. So in just the first couple centuries, there was Antioch and Jerusalem and Alexandria and Rome and Corinth and all these places, these cities where there were Christian churches and communities that all had copies of all of these books. And as they would come together in whatever fashion, in council meetings where they would all go to and to a certain place and see what's going on in other places and make decisions about things and check with each other. They would all see, well, here's the Gospel of Matthew we have. Well, here's the letter of Paul to the church at Rome that we have. Well, here's James's letter. And they would all see what they all had. And all of the records show that they all had the same thing. So at least back then, these various different locations across the Mediterranean area all had copies of the letters that Paul wrote and James and the Gospels and so forth, and they all had the same thing. And as as time went by, people began to preach and write down sermons and commentaries on the Bible and histories and so forth. And the fact is that we can reconstruct the entire New Testament and almost all of the Old Testament by taking the passages that people in that day, in the first couple of centuries, wrote a sermon and they preached on this passage. And so we have a written copy of their sermon with that passage, and it matches up with our most ancient texts of the Bible itself. So there's other extra biblical writings, sermons, commentaries, histories, and things that quote the Bible they had at their time, and there's so many of those that we can check in these various, Irenaeus and Ignatius and Polycarp and these ancient old Christian guys who wrote about the Bible or preached sermons from the Bible, that we can collect enough passages, Bible passages from their writings that compare with the actual Bible that's been handed down and so forth. So it simply isn't the case. And later archaeological discoveries, Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth, things that have been sealed in clay pots for generations are broken open, looked at, and it hasn't been handed down it's been sealed up since it was written, and they match exactly with what was originally written. So there's tons of evidence that the Bible we have today is the same Bible that was originally written, that those early Christians had. And the thing about it that can be frustrating to the believer is we shouldn't treat the Bible like any other book in certain ways. It's the only book that God wrote that's inspired, but we should treat it like other books in a lot of other ways. It's a book. It's written down. You turn the pages and read it, and we'll teach in schools about Caesar and Aristotle and so forth. And the fact is that the earliest writings that we have attributed to Aristotle are over 1,400 years after he died, and we have 5 copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. And nobody presents teachings about Aristotle as though it's a little tenuous, that we only have a handful of copies of copies of copies of copies, and the first ones appeared almost 1,500 years after he died. The same with Pliny, the Roman historian. It's I think 750 years after he died, the first copies of copies of copies, and there's only 7 extant copies of anything that Pliny wrote. Julius Caesar, who much of what we know about the history of the Roman Empire he wrote a lot. He wrote poems, he wrote histories, he wrote all kinds of things. But again, we have it's over 1,000 years after Julius Caesar died before the first of any of his writings showed up, and they were copies of copies of copies of copies. And yet, we teach these in school as though we know what we're talking about, which is, you have to work with the material you have. But then we turn around with the Bible and mockingly ridicule any validity that anyone suggests to it, when we have over 5,300 ancient manuscripts, over 10,000 Latin Vulgates, and many of these 5,300 ancient Greek texts were written within 40 years of when they were written. The copies we have were within 40 years of when they were written. So if you're eliminating any bias about religion or Christianity in particular, if you're just looking at the historic record and the facts of the matter, it's ludicrous that people are so quick to undermine and even ridicule and mock people who believe the Bible and read the Bible, to consider that what the Bible says is what was originally written, that we can have, that it's a trustworthy document. They'll ridicule that, but they think they know what they're talking about when it comes to Aristotle or Pliny's history or Caesar or anything else. It just kind of doesn't add up. We're Christians are kind of on the winning side of this argument of evidence of validity. So with that, you can believe it or not believe. You can take what the Bible says and consider it as inspired from God and eternal truth that we should study, understand, and learn. or you can dismiss it as a bunch of silliness if you want to. But you can't say that the reason you're dismissing it or don't believe it is because it's copies of copies of copies that have obviously changed through the generations and men have corrupted it and so forth. That's just not the historic case. You can look again historically and see what was originally written, what we have today, and there's just not an argument there. You can, as I say, you can not believe it, what the Bible teaches, but you can't argue that what the Bible teaches isn't what it originally taught. What the Bible we have today presents as the truth is what it presented as the truth as it was written. It's up to you, of course, whether you believe that to be the case or not. And we'll kind of look more closely at what it does present. The first clip I did, we talked about that a large part of what's presented today as Christianity is not what the Bible teaches. We look just today now at, is the Bible a valid source to understand what Christianity is? And the next time we'll look at some of those points of what the Bible presents to be Christianity. And we'll see you then, and hope you have a nice day.